Hello, everyone. Today we will be looking at our research questions. Research question is very, very important in a research. Without research questions, there is no need to embark on a research. Without research problems, there is no need to embark on a research. And today we will be looking at what are the nitty-gritty, what do we need to understand about research questions. So the first thing that we need to understand is what is a research question. A research question is a clear, focused, and concise questions that guides a research study. So basically, it defines the scope, it defines the directions and the purpose of the research. And most importantly, it also helps in determining the methodological and the focus of the research. So it is important that we really understand the concept of a research questions. We need to understand that at the end of the whole research, we need to provide answers to these questions that was raised in the research. And that is why a well-crafted research question is essential for conducting a meaningful and systematic investigations. So basically, a research question should be smart, specific, measurable, obtainable, realistic, and time bound. So a research question should be clear and precise. It should be researchable. It should be relevant. It should be adding to the existing body of knowledge. It should be something that has been crafted out of the issues going on around the world. And also, a research question should also be complex. A research question should not be crafted in a way that can easily be answered with a yes or no. Now, the other thing that we will be looking at is formulating a research questions. Now, like I said, a research question is the basis of your research. It's the essence of you embarking on a rigorous dissertations. So, formulating research questions and providing answers to those questions is the reasons for carrying out the research. So, there are several ways of formulating a research questions. So, it could be either in the following. We have different ways of formulating research questions. It could be descriptives, it could be correlations, it could be predictive, group differences, and cause and effect. Now let's talk about the descriptives. It centers around describing a variables. So what is the typical blood pressure of a patient in the hospital? The correlation is there any relationship between inflations and cost of living? So in terms of the predictive questions, it talks around what is the predicted mortality rate for an individual locations at the 40 degrees north? Now, the other questions that we could be formulating is the group differences. Is there any significant differences in the score of a module between male and female in level 7? That's between two groups. Now, the other group differences could be among 3 or 4 groups. Is there any significant differences in the score of a module between economics, finance, and accounting department? That's among 3 groups. So the other aspect of the question that could be asked in the research is the cause and effect. To what extent does climate change affect the quality of life? So when you're crafting out your research question, you could be looking at these 5 different aspects: descriptive questions, correlation questions, predictive questions, group differences questions, and cause and effect questions. Now, crafting your questions, your research questions, the other thing that you need to do is to identify and define the variables in your research questions. You need to understand what are the components of the variables that you need to provide answers to those questions. How are you be able to get those data, those variables to be able to provide answers to those questions? And there are 2 types of variables you need to focus on in your research question. The first one is the dependent variables, and the other one is the independent variables. The essence of your research centers around your dependent variables, which is also known as the outcome variables. Now, there are different types of variables that could be identified under the dependent variable. We have the binary variable, which could be in form of a yes or no. We also have a discrete variables, which could be a number of accident occurrence. We also have the continuous variables, which could be salaries, profit. We also have ordered categorical variables, which could be in a 5 Likert scale, 7 Likert scales in form of strongly agree, agree undecided, disagree, strongly agree, and strongly decided. So we also have a nominal variable, which could be male or female, which could be On other category as well, which would be north, east, west, and south. We could also have a race, black, white, Asian, and so on and so forth. So the other type of variable that should be identified is the independent variables. You need to determine the type of the independent variables in your research questions. You need to define the number of loops in the dependent variables, and you also need to define the scale of measurement of independent variables. So it is important that while crafting your research question, also try to identify and define the variables in your research questions, because at the end of the day, in your methodology, in your research, you need to plan how you are going to collect those data of variables, as the case may be, to provide answers to those research questions. Now, you need to determine the need for parametric or non-parametric tests. So the first thing to do, like I said, is you need to check the outcome, your dependent variables, whether they meet the assumptions of a parametric test. And for every parametric test, there is always a corresponding non-parametric test. So check for the histogram, check for the skewness of your dependent variables, checks for the outcome very short as the discrete or continuous. Check the statistical test for the normality, such as the Shapiro-Wilk or the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test. No, the outcome variable should be normally distributed. So if your data sets are not normally distributed, you need to use a non-parametric test. So first and foremost, you need to determine the type of variables you have in your dependent variables. Now, these are research questions and estimation techniques that we can use. Firstly, if you're measuring the relationship between inflations and cost of living. Now, with this type of questions, you should be looking at the correlation concept. Now, for a parametric test, if your data set are normally distributed, you should be using a Pearson correlation test. Now, if your data set are not normally distributed, you should be, or maybe parameter of your data set, your dependent variables are not normally distributed, or you have a Likert scales data set, or a binary data set, or in other data sets, you should be looking at a Spearman rank correlation or chi-square test of independence. Now let's go to the group comparison test now. So the question says, what is the effect of two different test prep programs on the average exam scores for students from the same class? Group differences from the same class. So we have the group comparison from the same class of data set. So if your data set are normally distributed, you should be using a PET test. However, if your data set are not normally distributed, you should be using a Mann-Whitney-U test. Now, the other type of question that you can also ask in your research is a group differences between two groups or between three groups. Now, let's look at between two groups now. The question says, is there any significant differences in the score of a module between male and female in level 7? Now, this type of questions focus on two groups. And if your data set are parametric and normally distributed, you can be using independent t-test. If your data set is not normally distributed, you can use a Wilkinson ranked sum test. Now, the other type of groups is when you have between three, 4 or more groups. So the question says, is there any significant differences in the score of a module between economics, accounting, and finance department? So that's a group differences between 3, 4 groups. And if your data set parametric tests are normally distributed, you can be using ANOVA, analysis of variance, and MANOVA. Why, if your data set is not normally distributed, you can use a non-parametric test like a Kruskal-Wallis test. So basically, your research question is the essence of you embarking on the research. It should be properly crafted, focusing on different dimensions such as the correlations, such as the group differences, such as group differences, group comparison, descriptives, and you should also determine the type of variables that are embedded in your research question to be able to know what kind of estimation techniques you can use for your research. So this is all everything about research question. If you have any questions, drop a comment in the comment section and I will respond to you. Thank you.